In Christ alone my hope is found. He is my life, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this solid ground. Firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace. When fears are still, when striving cease. My comforter, my all in all. Here in the love of Christ I stand. In Christ alone, who took on flesh. Fullness of God in helpless pain. This gift of love and righteousness. Scorned by the ones he came to save. In Bible class, I had a hard time with my main lesson as far as worship service, as far as trying to condense down 11 pages. So I don't have to condense it down now. We can go through the whole 11 pages. I can start this morning and we'll finish up this, this afternoon. It'll be late this morning. And so we can get everything in there, because what I want to talk about this morning, and it's not just about the ladies, it's not just about the mothers, but it is something that I think is very important that we all understand and get a good grasp of. And it's also the importance of many things that this one mother we're going to talk about this morning has done. We're going to be looking as far as in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 22. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 22 is where the text is going to be found this morning. What we're going to be looking at is this one mother, this one lady, and I'll give you a hint. Her name is going to be Hannah. Hannah has a special situation that she's in, and we go back to 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1, and we find out that it was in the hill country of Ephraim where this man Elkanah, and he was the son of, and he was an Ephraimite. And then it goes in verse 2, and it really talks about here what some of the troubles and tribulations that Hannah was having at this time. And there was and it talks about this man here, he had two wives. One was Hannah, and the other name was Peninnah. And so now the second lady, not Hannah, but Peninnah, she turned around, she had children. Hannah did not have any children. And so when the husband would divide things up and whatnot and give to the two different wives, he would always give to his one wife and then give to her children, but he gives a double portion as far as to Hannah, because she had no kids. And the sad thing about it, the competition, the ridicule from one wife to the other was getting pretty bad, because one wife said, "Yeah, I've got kids. Where's yours?" "Oh, I don't have any." And she would pick at her and ridicule her about that for years on end. It goes on, talks about years and years. And you kind of think about, okay, so, what's the big deal? Get over it. In verse 3, it talks about where, he would, they'd go to this year after year, go to the city to worship and to make sacrifices to God of hosts in Sheol. And so they were faithful people to God. That is one of the key things I want to emphasize this morning, is that they were faithful people of God, but yet there still had some issues. There still had some problems. And Hannah, we're going to look at her example. I think most everybody will know or maybe recognize, Hannah as far as who her son is. And if you don't, you will understand in just a few minutes who. And so anyway, Hannah goes on, and we have this rivalry going on in verse 6. It provokes her to grievous, it just grieves her, just grieves her to no end about what the other woman does. And so year by year went on. That's verse 7. It talks about. And then her husband, one day in verse 8, he said, "Hey, why are you weeping? Why are you not eating? Why is your heart sad?" And he knew the reason. He knew that she didn't have any kids. The other wife did. And so she was kind of feeling bad. And so he makes this statement. I could really see a guy making this up and saying it, because I don't see how a woman would ever say something like this. But it says, "I am, am I not
more. This is verse 8. Am I not more to you than 10 sons? Hey, by the way, I know you've got, don't have no kids, and I know the other wife does have kids, but am I not worth more than 10 sons? Hey, come on, get real here. Stop being sad, stop weeping, stop getting all upset because you don't have no kids. It's just one of those things in life, unfortunately. Well, after they had eaten and drinking, and then she arose, and then Eli, the priest, he was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. And now she did something here that was really interesting, that really confused Eli the priest here. It really got confused here in verse 10. But she was so deeply distressed. Deeply distressed. But what did a faithful woman of God do? She was deeply distressed. So just because you're a faithful child of God, you are doing everything you can as far as the sacrifices and all the other things that you're required to do. She's doing that, and she's remaining faithful even though she's in a situation that is really tough. And so here she is being faithful and distressed. But she goes in, like I say, in verse 10, not just distressed, but deeply distressed, and prayed to the Lord. She turned around and sets a good example. She's in a bad situation. Her relationship with her husband is being stressed out because of the other wife, keeps ridiculing her, keep on and on, day in and day out, and year after year. And he's not being too sympathetic because, hey, I'm worth more than 10 sons, hey, think about what you got. So she wasn't getting no sympathy, and she was deeply distressed, but yet she still prayed to God. That was not as a scapegoat. She did not use it as a last resort. Well, okay, now everything else kind of failed, and this didn't work, that didn't work, so now guess what? We're going to start praying to God. I said, no. What she was doing the whole time, it sets up her faith. It shows us her faith. It shows us how dedicated she was. And so she sat there, and she was deeply distressed and prayed to God and wept bitterly. In verse 11, and she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the afflictions of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. She's not just asking for a baby. She's asking for a specific kind of baby, which is a what? A boy. And she says, hey, God, I'm going to make you a deal. You give me a son, not a daughter. I mean, nowadays, some people think, well, it's maybe 75, 25%. No, it's still 50-50. You got a boy or you got a girl. And she says to God, if you give me a son, specifically, you give me a son, and then I will turn around and devote him back to you all the days. And then they mention something here is really interesting. The very last part of verse 11, it says, and no razor shall touch his head. Why is she promoting kind of the hippie style, as we used to call it back in the 70s? Why is she promoting this long-haired type of a deal? She just likes long hair, want to make him look like a girl? Why is she saying that? About no razor shall touch his head. Is it just put in there, she's had something else say, God, you do this, I'm going to make a deal. Oh, by the way, he's going to be a long-haired kind of oddball. So what was the significance about the long hair? Got a question. Samson, he had long hair too. And there's a reason why he had long hair. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're exactly right. You're on the right track. So what is the reason why, Samson had long hair, and this guy here that turned around had long hair, and a son? She's promising, you give me a son because he's not born yet. You give me a son, and guess what? I'll devote him back to you. I'll give him back to you. He'll be yours forever. And guess what? No razor will touch his head. it could be his strength comes from his hair, but it's more than that, though. It did for Samson, you're right. For this gentleman, no. It's part of a valve, if you would. It's a valve. It's a valve. It's called the Nazarite valve. And part of the Nazarite vow, if you was a Nazarite and you was going to this, now it wasn't a lifetime deal. You had to do it for a period of time. But you turn around and it may be all your life or it may be parts. They had different ways of doing it. But here they was talking about the Nazarite vow. She says, I will keep the Nazarite vow. I will keep that covenant. I will make sure he turns around and is obedient to you by not even, cutting his hair. No razor to cut his hair. And so Samson, we know, is in comparison, is what was being mentioned, absolutely right, is that Samson, as long as he had his hair, he had his strength. But where did his strength come from? With himself? No, it came from God. His strength came from God. And the reason why his strength came from God, because he kept the covenant. He kept the vow. He kept the oath that he was supposed to keep. Same thing with Hannah's son. She said he is going to keep the Nazarite vow. And he is going to be dedicated. And the long hair was a symbol from a guy, was a symbol of the Nazarite vow. And so she is just telling God, hey, you let me have a son, and I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. Verse 11, and no razor shall touch his head. And then in verse 12, and she is praying this. She is praying this. She's just not talking out loud. In verse 12, and as she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. The priest is looking over her like, okay, but what did he see? He said, verse 13, Hannah was speaking in her heart, but only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. I'm sorry, Hannah, I see your lips moving, but I don't hear a word you're saying. And she was speaking from the heart.
She must be drunk, huh?
Well, and that's something must be wrong. He's saying, oh boy, what is going on here? Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. Now, they're at the temple. Here she is. She's continuing prayer. She's speaking to God in her heart, talking to God, and her lips are just re-emphasizing what's coming out of her heart, but he can't hear nothing. He just draws the natural conclusion that she's out of her mind. She's under the influence. She's drunk. And then Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. Boy, he already had her nailed and pegged right quick. Okay, yep, you're drunk. I already know it. Didn't look to see or ask her. Didn't say, hey, I can't smell nothing. But he just said, you're drunk. Oh, he jumped to conclusions. And then verse 15, but Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Been pouring out her soul. She was so intense, so ingrained as far as what she was doing, so focused. And that's what we need to take from the lesson this morning, is that Hannah is so persistent. Hannah is so focused. Hannah is so dedicated that she wants this. And she's just not making, say, God, give me a son and I'll be good to you. I'll do what you say. She's already obeying God. She's already been faithful. But she says, no, I will make sure my son is devoted to you, even to the Nazarite vow. And so she goes through and she goes and she says, hey, I'm not drunk. I haven't been drinking, not wine or any kind of strong drink. But she is a troubled in spirit. She was having problems with this. She would remember, she at home, the other wife, her husband's wife would be ridiculing her about, she got kids, you have no kids. And so back in that day, it was very scornful for a woman not to turn around and have kids. That's the way they was looked on. That was about all their whole duty was, take care of the house and have kids. That's it. Unfortunately, they didn't have much value. And so here we go as far as, no kids. And so she's troubled in spirit. Did she ask one time to the Lord and just, that was it? God, I want a child. I want a son, and I'll give him to you. Okay, thanks. Good, amen. And then that was it. She didn't. And what I really want us to glean from this as well is that the persistence here. How many times do we pray for something? God, I want this, I want that. God, I need some better health. God, I need ability to do this. I need to do this, or I need this to happen or whatever. And then we go on and forget about it. And then at the end of it, well, I guess God really didn't care. Or he don't love me no more. And so we turn around, the New Testament will tell us that we ask amiss, we don't ask correctly, and we definitely are not persistent. And so here we are, she is an example of being a persistent woman. And not only is she persistent, she is out to do everything she can to plead with the Lord. And so again, in verse 15, she was a woman troubled in spirit, and says, I have drunk neither this wine or strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. How many times when we have a problem in life? How many times when we have a situation in life that I got this, I can handle this, I don't need God to do this, I can take care of this. Or we get these problems and stuff, and finally when we can't handle it, we mess it up even more. And then it goes to the point where, God, I need you now. I need you to take care of this for me. I need your help for me. So, but do we ever sit down and really pour out our soul before the Lord? Do we really pour ourselves out? In other words, what I see in verse 15 here is I see that Hannah is just opening up her soul, open up her life, just say, God, you know me. And she's being out. Now, you got to stop and think, why is she doing this so God will understand who she is? Is she doing this because, well, God, just in case you don't know, let me tell you who I am and what am I doing and what's the problem here, God knows everything. So she is not doing it for God's benefit. So the benefit of this pouring out my soul here before the Lord is her benefit. She is realizing that, what does she have to offer God? What kind of bargaining chip does she have to offer God? None. What is she going to make a deal? Well, she can just offer, give them back to you, but that's all she can do. But she can't do that without having a son. And she is childless, so she has no son. And so how does she, so she pours out her soul. She's up front finally being honest with herself. That's what she's doing. She's looking at herself and says, I've done these things. I haven't been the best, but I'm trying. And you mean so much to me, God. And you're always on my heart. You're always on my mind. I'm speaking and my lips are moving, but my mouth isn't, producing the words, but it's hearing from my heart. And so she goes on and literally just pours out her soul before the Lord. Wow. In verse 16, do not regard your servant as a worthless woman. Wow, boy, she is speaking to the priest here. Do not regard your servant. And she's still in this is what she's still praying here, and telling that, hey, Elijah, Eli the priest, is that, hey, Eli, that, and God, I'm not a worthless woman. All the days I have been speaking out of my anxiety and vexation. In other words, she was looking forward to having a son. She's looking forward to having a child. She is being convicted, vexation. She is convicted that she wants to have a son. She can raise a son. She can fulfill that obligation. And so she is telling God this. And she's telling Eli, the priest. And Eli, in verse 17, answers, says, oh, you got to stop and think about her respect for the priesthood there. Because he turns around and says words here that really, think about now, before I read those words, think about again, what does her husband say? Am I not more, to you than 10 sons in verse 8? What kind of sympathy is that? Am I not worth more than 10 sons? You don't have no kids. So what? Am I not worth more than 10? It's, really not much sympathy. But then the priest comes in here and he turns around and says in verse 17, he says, go in peace. You think about somebody having anxiety attacks. You think about somebody that has a hard time being able to sleep at night. You think about somebody that's just kind of an emotional wreck because all she is consumed about is for is having a child. All she is thinking about is, God, if you just answer this one prayer for me, I will do this and this. And God, if you would just, if you would just hear me, God. And she was consumed with this. And so the priest, Eli, turns around and says, go in peace. And the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. Wow. He says, hey, just go in peace. Don't worry about it no more. Don't get the anxiety. Don't get the vexation. Don't get all disturbed. Don't get all worked up over this no more. Why? Because, hey, God is going to grant your petition that you have made with him. Verse 18, and she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. She has a problem that's been going on for years. A trouble that's been going on for years. A situation that she lives in that's been very troubling for years. And then she talks to the priest. She gives it over to God. And the priest, Eli, turns and says, hey, go in peace. God's going to grant it. And so what does she do? Kind of mope around, think, yeah, right. I've been trying all this time. What now? Why all of a sudden is it going to be? No. She had the faith that we need to have as far as in God saying, hey, I've made my petition. And God says, hey, fine, through Eli the priest, he's going to grant it. Go in peace. So she eats, and then she turns around and does what? Her face is no longer sad. Wow. You talking about just kind of like a light switch is changing. She talking about somebody here. You're talking about where she is there, where she's finally received the good news that she's been begging for years. In verse 19, they rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house. And then her husband, they turned around, and guess what? The Lord remembered her. And then in verse 20, and in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name what? Samuel. Yes, Samuel. Now we heard about Samuel, and for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. And then her husband and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. Verse 22, but Hannah did not go up. For she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. So the question there is, did she get what she wanted? Did she finally get an answer? The other question is, did she get the answer that she wanted as soon as she wanted? No. It took a while. It took a long while. And we have examples after examples after examples. Abraham and Sarah, boy, they waited a long time. It wasn't them that waited. God wanted them to wait so God could prove a point. This is what we have a hard time a lot of times with. It is the time of who that we do this under. It's God's timing. It's God's plan. Yes, sir. It's not our timing. It's not our schedule. It's when it is God's time. Hannah was a godly woman. She wanted to have a son. She prayed, and she said, not only give me a son, but I will dedicate him. And the thing about it is, what did she do? She actually did what she said. So she is a follower-up on a promise. She is faithful to her promise. Oh, I tell you, many times we make promises to God, and many times we kind of have to renege on them because of change.
Wouldn't that be hard? First baby she got.
Yes, it'd be very hard. And for the mother, and how long did she keep him? Just till she winged him. And then when he can eat on his own, fine. It's like, you didn't keep him till he's 18. You didn't keep him till he's 21, as we call it, a legal adult. You didn't keep him that long. No, you turn around soon as he could eat on his own, boom, he's gone. And for a mother to give up a child like that, you're talking about having faith in God. Yes.
Eli didn't do a very good job with his own sons. They were wicked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So So, here she is. She listened, God listened to her prayer. He granted her, and then she had a baby named Samuel. And he became a prophet and a high priest of Israel. Samuel, imagine this book we're looking in, 1 Samuel. Where was it? It's talking about Samuel. So Hannah's life we can find 3 examples that would help mothers produce children that come to serve God someday, as we wrap things up. Hannah turned around her life. She was a praying mother. She prayed, and we need to take this as not as far as just mothers. We need to take it for the fathers. We need to take it for every individual. We need to take it for every child of God. She prayed regularly. She prayed repeatedly. She prayed earnestly. Do we just kind of say things and go on? No, we need to remember what her cure was for her problem, is regularly praying to God repeatedly. Oh, well, God heard me first time. No, we don't need to do it for God's sake, because he knows everything. We need to do it for our sake. We need to be earnest about it. Another thing is Hannah was, and we don't like this as well, she was a patient person. She was a patient mother. She was very patient. She waited to receive. Oh, God, that is one hard lesson for all of us to learn, is to wait upon the Lord. And then she did exactly what she said she would do. She kept her promise. She kept her promise to give her son back to God. And she kept her promise to pray for her son all the days that she lived. And so when we think about Hannah as a person, we think about her as a mother, we think about her faith here is what I want to concentrate this morning, is that Hannah was very dedicated, committed. She didn't waver. She didn't let people just kind of shrug her off and, just tell her, no, you're just a woman, just get out of here, just too bad, so sad. She didn't, give in to when somebody wasn't sympathetic. She turned around and was dedicated. She was devoted to the Lord. And that is something that we need to make sure we look at her example and say, hey, I need to be dedicated. I need to be faithful to the Lord. And God said, hey, I've got a plan for Samuel. And you know what? That fits right in the plan, which that plan was already shaped before the foundation of the world. That's hard for me to always think about and to understand, is God works outside of time. And so we think about how all this timing works on. There's no such thing as far as time in God's world and where God is at. There is no such thing as time. It is just day. And it's just there, and it's all there. And so God already knew beforehand what was going to happen. He knew her problem, and he knew what she's going to do, but she had convinced herself. If she turned around and God said, hey, hey, God, I need a son, and she had a son, and that may have been it. But she needed to know that the son was from, as far as from God.
Was it Isaac that you were going to stab?
Absolutely, Abraham. He would have followed through, no doubt, because he had his hand back about ready to go stab his son on the offering as God told him to do. And you're talking about that's your only child. And this is Hannah's only son here. Now, Hannah was blessed, as it goes on, it says too. She had 3 boys and two girls later. Had a whole 5 of them. So, but then again, she didn't really lose Samuel, because I'm sure Samuel wanted to keep track of his mother. But his allegiance, his bringing up was all with the priesthood there. And so it made it really a special bond there. But, be able to see her dedication, see her just, putting herself to the point where, God, just grant me this. And be a servant. And her dedication, that goes to show me that, we don't need to, 1, make God do what he don't want to do or not plan to do. 2, we need to be persistent. Many times it's easy to just give up. Just give up. Can't do it. Oh, well. No, we need to always be persistent in God's word. Always studying. And it shows her faith. Anybody else got any other questions? Like I say, Hannah is an excellent example for the ladies as well as the men, as far as being an example of a strong, faithful child of God. And that's what we need to do. Nothing else, then we're dismissed. Thank y'all.
Calls me home, here in the power of Christ I'll stand. No power of hell, no scheme of man can his hand.